You guys having fun at LASCON so far? Yeah, heck yeah. I was talking with James Wickett in the hallway earlier, and we realized that we've been doing this since 2010. And when James and I first started this conference, we had no clue what this was going to turn into. It was just us going like, yeah, maybe we can put something together. It might be fun if we got like a bunch of our friends in the same room and talk security stuff. And to see what all this has turned into is pretty incredible. It's a pretty amazing feeling. Kudos to Kyle and to Tiana and to all of the LASCON team. This event does not happen without all their volunteer efforts. So give them a round of applause. Awesome. So I have the fortune of getting to talk to you guys immediately after lunchtime. This is the time when the food coma starts to set in, and we all start to zone out a little bit. So I wanted to start us off with some jokes. Jokes? What do you call a group of math and science geeks at a party? Social engineers. Oops. Why did the programmer leave the camping trip early? It's one for my daughters. There were too many bugs. And what are a CISO's two biggest cybersecurity fears? Everyone who works at the company and everyone who doesn't. Yeah. Get that. Hey, I'm Josh. I used to run the security program at National Instruments. I've spent over a decade running their security program. After that, I moved on, and now I run my own business. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called SimpleRisk, a free open source GRC product. I was supposed to do this talk with a buddy named John. John is based out of Utah. John has been a CISO for a long, long time. Currently, he's the CISO over at Alpine Software Group, ASG. And he's basically like the CISO for a bunch of other companies that may or may not have CISOs. So his job is even harder than mine. And John, unfortunately, told me like 2 days ago they can't be here. So sorry, John, but we all wish you the best. If you want the slides, I know people like to look up slides later, so I'm going to make this easy on you. I'm going to put a big long link up there, and then I'm going to put that QR code up there to make it even easier. And because we're all security people and we don't like QR codes, apparently people were complaining about the badge in the back, how it has a QR code. By the way, that's a game. It's not me trying to rickroll you or something like that. Here's a bit.ly, because bit.lys are so much more secure than QR codes. Right, yeah. Leave that up for another second. Everybody get it? Cool. Yeah, so let's talk about the Atlas syndrome. I talk with customers all the time about this, and as security practitioners, oftentimes we feel like we're Atlas. We have the weight of the world on our shoulders. And everything that we do, every issue that we find, every vulnerability scan that we run, every pen test report that we get is just another weight on our shoulders. We start to feel the weight of that. And I want you guys to take a moment just to think about that. Think about all the tools that are in your arsenal. How many are there? There are 5, 10, more than that, probably more than that, right? You've got your NGAV, you've got your firewalls, you've got your SIM, all this stuff. And think about the alerts that are coming from. Sorry, no heart attacks here today, right? There's a lot of them. And there was a SC media survey a while back at the 2018 RSA conference, and they said that 55% of enterprises see more than 10,000 alerts a day. Whoa. 27% are seeing more than 1 million alerts per day. That's a lot. Can you actually triage all those alerts? Can you do something with those alerts? And even worse, every single one of those alerts is just another straw on your back. It's just more weight on your shoulders. There was a Demisto State of SOAR report, and they said security teams were bombarded with 174,000 alerts a week, an average of just shy of 25,000 a day. So regardless of the source, we all know our security teams are up against a constant barrage of alerts. Now, when I was at NI, we had over 100,000 vulnerabilities that were found by our scanner that was waiting to be triaged. And for me, I felt kind of like that guy, right? The world is burning around me. We've got a lot of stuff, a lot of problems that are out there. Every platform that alerted, every vulnerability that we found, I felt like they were my burden to bear. I'd have panic attacks thinking about all the what if scenarios. What if a hacker found that thing that we didn't fix yesterday? What if we have an internal threat, some person who finds that issue on our network and is able to compromise that, and then the data and all these what if scenarios. And if you're anything like me, you probably have trouble sleeping at night sometimes thinking about that thing that might be your final nail in the coffin. Any of you guys relate to this? Am I in the wrong place? Yeah, okay, all right, cool. We're among friends. So what do we do about it? There's a few things we can do about that. The first is Chicken Little. Chicken Little is the security practitioner that basically runs around and they go, the sky is falling, right? Every new issue, the sky is falling. There's no prioritization. There's no way to discern which thing is the most important thing for us to work on. And it becomes a constant distraction from the work, which is actually paying the bills. So what happens next? How do we get out of this? Well, management starts telling you no. They start to ignore you. You get used to hearing the word no because you're being seen as an inhibitor to the business. John and I were looking at Reddit. There's our CISO on Reddit. There's our security on Reddit. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen these security practitioners talking about how their management doesn't get it, right? They talk about how their CISO is a tool, how they can't get funding from the business. You guys relate, yes? Yeah? So I'm going to give you guys a chance, right? Red pill, blue pill moment here. You take the blue pill, the story ends, you go back to work, continuing to feel like Atlas. You're going to bemoan to your fellow security practitioners about how you're constantly being told no, right? Or you take the red pill, you get to stay in Wonderland with me, and I get to show you how deep this rabbit hole goes. So we're offering the truth, nothing more. So red pill, same old way, same binary approach, same Atlas syndrome, or we find a new way. And this is where my buddy John comes in. And John gets to talk about good information security and risk management leadership because, well, now I guess I'm the vendor that nobody cares about, right? And John's the CISO. John's the smart guy in the room. It's weird. As soon as you turn into a vendor, it's like you're no longer that person. So, the foundation of this perspective is that security leadership's responsibility is to define, to assess, and to contextualize the reporting. We want to make sure that as security practitioners, our job is to assess the risks, to find the stuff that's out there, to convey the risks, to make sure that management, that the C-levels, that the board is aware of these risks that exist, but nowhere does it say that our job is to accept the risk. In fact, I would argue that is absolutely unequivocally not our job as security practitioners. So know your role, right? The key here is that we're not the risk owners. If you guys are assessing the risk, if you're finding these issues, how many of these issues do you guys actually have the money to fix directly? How many of you guys have the people on your teams to be able to fix these issues? I'm guessing the answer is nobody, right? As security practitioners, we need to find the issues, but we are never the ones who can actually fix these things. So we're the discoverers, and we help teams by understanding and responding to the risk, to the threat that we're facing. We're making sure that management is aware of this. So how do we do that? Our companies trust us to do risk assessments. Once we do these risk assessments, we get to propose what we should be working on, what things that we should be focusing on. And we agree together what that is. We start looking at things like control frameworks, and we look at what are the controls for our environment, mutually agreed upon controls, that we should be utilizing. And then we analyze against these different frameworks. So as security practitioners, our job is to be there to serve the business and to support the business in improving security. And the sooner we start to figure this out, the better off we are in our industry. So to accomplish all of this, our program needs to be written down. And not only written down, but if you write something and you file it away, it's just like a pen test report. It goes into a folder somewhere and we never look at it again. We need to make sure that we're taking this information and we're sharing it with our management team. We're saying, hey, these are the controls. These are the frameworks for our organization. Do you agree? Does this sound good? Are you willing to support me in helping to achieve these goals? Now, at one point, I was running the NI SOX audit, publicly traded company, and I was working directly with our third-party audit firm, EY, to basically validate the controls that we were testing. And my team would do a first kind of pass at all of our controls, make sure that we're doing okay. If there were issues, we'd identify them up front and fix those, hopefully before the auditors came in. But the first thing that happened when these auditors came in is they would sit me down and they'd have a sheet of paper and it was literally a checklist. They had the little box, do they do this? Check yes or no, right? It's like, do you like me? Check yes or no. So we'd sit down with the auditor and he'd go through his checklist and he'd be like, do you have a firewall? Yes. Are you monitoring traffic? Yes. Do you do access controls? Yes. And so at the end of this, we said yes to everything. We got a big pat on the back. Were we any more secure from going through that checklist? Definitely not, right? And I wrote this blog post about the experience that I had here. It was that auditors just don't understand security. Because anytime you take a checklist approach to security, be that literally going down the checklist, or be that, hey, we have to do PCI, so I'm only going to do PCI, that's not good security, right? That is truly a checklist. So just because we say this is our framework, these are the rules we're going to follow, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're any more secure than we were the day before. It was kind of funny. After I wrote this post, one of those auditors happened to see it. And he said, hey, Josh, I saw that blog post that you wrote. He's like, do you really feel that way? And I was like, Alex, yeah, I do. I was like, they literally came in here with a checklist. Can you tell me that they understand the results of that checklist, or were they just looking for the yes, no answers? So our risk management framework, this is a bit of a more visual way of looking at what we do as security leaders. We run parts of the company through this kind of traditional risk management framework or process. And what's important is that we have a clear definition of what's done for a given control. Because otherwise, frankly, the business runs out of patience with us. If we can't tell the business what is the done state, the question gets asked, when will this stop? And my manager literally asked me that. I had this big plan for security and everything else, and every year I'd ask for more tools and more technologies, and he sat me down and he's like, Josh, when do we stop paying for stuff? And of course, my first thought is, this dumbass? Yeah, never. We are going to be paying for stuff year after year because the threats are changing, right? The environment is changing. We're constantly deploying new stuff, and so I'm always playing from behind. It will never stop. Now, to try and be a little bit more PC with my manager, I said, all right, how about we do this? We're going to do a road mapping exercise. So we took the NIST cybersecurity framework, we being me and our internal audit guy, Alex. We took the NIST CSF framework and we went through and we said, let's do a maturity exercise. Let's figure out where we're at today versus where we want to be. And we'll label this from, no, we don't do it at all the way up to, it's an optimized process, we've got auditing in place, it's automated, whatever. So we want to try and figure out how mature we were at these processes. And then ultimately we took those results and we said, if there's a gap, there's a risk. And if there's a risk, we need to identify a mitigation. How are we going to fix this particular issue? And so for us, this was I won't say easy because this literally took us weeks to put together, but it was a good way for us to show management a thought process behind this. We looked at a framework, in this case NIST CSF. We applied a methodology, the maturity modeling, and we came up with, here's where our gaps are, Here's how we're going to address this. And we use that to define our roadmap. These are the things we're going to work on. Now, of course, I can't do everything, right? It's not like we're going to have all this done by next year, but now I can say, these are the thematic issues. These are the projects that we need to be working on. We'll do this one next year. We'll do this one in 2 years. Here's the cost for that. And now we actually have a strategy. We have a vision. We have something that we can sell to management about what we're doing here. Now, this is where John comes in and he says, it stops when we meet the bar set by the control frame. So that bar, where we're going to get to, is not ours to decide as security practitioners. We can advise, we can say, hey, I think we should be a level 3 across the board because, I don't know, 3 is a cool number. It's halfway between 1 and a 5, right? But reality is, again, we don't have the people, we don't have the money. We're trying to help the business. And so we present our bar to senior leadership. And leadership then needs to go, does this make sense? Or are these guys full of crap? Right? And once leadership approves, hopefully leadership approves. If leadership doesn't approve, you may want to find a new job. But once leadership finally approves and you guys agree on what the next steps are, now it's your job to meet it. We get to set what we're going to do, how to do it. Now I want to emphasize that this is a proposal. This is not a decision by security. And I think this is where a lot of us get it wrong. Oftentimes we are looking at these control frameworks and we say, we have to do all this stuff. NIST CSF says we must do all this stuff. ISO says we must do all this stuff. We don't. Sometimes it's okay not to get the ISO certification or not to have 100% NIST CSF compliant. It's the world we live in. It's reality. But we should have a reason for why we're not meeting those things, and maybe even a plan to eventually address those things sometime in the future. That's our roadmap. All right, so which comes first? Our business, they need a robust scope control set, which is going to map reasonable to realistic threats, or the controls, which are justified by policy, by standards, by procedures, and supported by guidelines. So some people are going to assert that we need policy and procedure first. They're usually the auditors, by the way. Others say we need the controls, and it's kind of an age-old argument. And the reality is, the answer is both. It's kind of a trick question, because it really doesn't matter which one comes first, and you're kind of going to alternate between modifying both of them. But the bottom line here is that your business looks to you to establish a strong governance foundation. That is our role as security. And so it's our job to use these security control frameworks and the policies and the guidelines and standards to support them. That's our job. So we want to identify and communicate the risk, and that's part of having a strong risk management program, and all of our associated processes are key. So how do we track which decisions are being made and who's making the decisions? Because I said, hey, we're going to assess, we're going to convey, but it's not our job to accept. So how do we track that? Well, they're going to keep saying no until you figure out this way, right? And the reason why they're going to keep saying no is because we don't have the context around the decisions that the executives are making. You don't know the issues they're facing. Sometimes it's better not to know, to be honest with you. It's not that they don't value security, in most cases, but rather that in the context of everything else, security may or may not be the priority. And this is really where you as a security leader can define yourself. You can complain, you can whine, or you can accept that the answer is no and try to come up with an alternative to compensate for that. And it might not be full mitigation, but it might help to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And that's really all risk management is. It's figuring out what the issues are and how do we put this into a place, how do we mitigate to the point where we're okay with accepting whatever that risk is. And there's an interesting quote here at the bottom. No is not a terminus, it's a junction. So just because they say no doesn't mean that the conversation is over. Mitigating this completely is not our only solution. So we can look at how do we partially mitigate this? How do we transfer the risk? Should we improve our monitoring? There's lots of different things that we can do, even with that no answer, that are productive for the organizations and show the value of us as security practitioners. All right, let's talk about tools and tricks. So this is how we get rid of the Atlas syndrome. Now, we want to create our strong governance foundation, use our control frameworks. We want to develop a strong risk management process that's easy to understand for us to follow. We want to enforce separate roles for risk assessment, conveyance, and acceptance. We want to enable the business to make informed risk-based decisions. Now, the business is probably going to fight you on this. They're going to fight you on this because now they have to accept the responsibility for saying no. When the business tells you, sorry, we don't have the people, we don't have the money to be able to fix this thing, and you go, hey, I need you to sign your name here, they're going to fight you. And they'll probably also fight you the first time you document their decision to not fix something. Because up until this point, it's been a conversation in some conference room somewhere, or maybe you got it in writing in an email, but they're usually smarter than that. But once we get a risk management program in place, and we define this as our corporate process, it sets us up to have the right conversations and have the right people being the ones who are accepting this responsibility. You guys ever seen a spreadsheet like this? If you look up like risk management spreadsheet, it looks like this online. You'll get dozens of templates that look exactly like this. And I will tell you, there's nothing really wrong with this spreadsheet. Well, I'll talk in a second about all the things that are wrong with this spreadsheet. But you can use this spreadsheet, right? You can certainly put this to work, and you can use this to enter your risks and things like that. But spreadsheets don't scale. Spreadsheet that has a dozen risks for a single team, it might be manageable. When I first started out my risk management program, I had an Excel spreadsheet. And when it was 2, 3, 10 risks, it wasn't a big deal. But once you're trying to manage hundreds or thousands of risks across multiple teams, it truly becomes unwieldy. Having multiple people editing the same spreadsheet at the same time is a recipe for disaster. And worse yet, how do you maintain an enterprise approach to risk management while ensuring that one team doesn't see another team's risk? Right? Do you have a separate spreadsheet for every team? I don't know. So the second item here, a spreadsheet isn't a database. Fact, right? You can do pivot tables in Excel. You can do some fancy formulas, some magic. You can join data from distinct tables. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. But in simple risk, in the application that I wrote, database queries can sometimes span a dozen or more tables. And that takes a fraction of a second. So there's really no substitute for the efficiency and the scale of a database where joining multiple distinct sets of data is concerned. You just can't do it with a spreadsheet. And then third, when you have a spreadsheet, it requires a considerable amount of maintenance. Those who fall into the spreadsheet approach to risk management will usually spend as much time tweaking their spreadsheet and messing with their formulas as they do actually managing risk. And so each new report that you want to add requires a substantial investment in terms of time to create it, and ends up really being a waste of resources that are far better utilized elsewhere in their organization. I mean, let's face it, most of us that are managing risk are really part-time risk managers. We've got other things to do with our time, and the risk management is just another thing on our plates. So once I realized that my spreadsheets wouldn't work, I actually used a homegrown Lowe's Notes database for risk management. Yeah, that was fun. Lowe's Notes can do that. All right, next. So in any case, our ideal solution here, what we really want to get to is something that's just as effective at thousands of risks across multiple teams. We want something that's going to scale for our organization. We want something that allows multiple people to perform risk management tasks at the same time. There's going to be multiple teams that are using this. We want reporting that rapidly combines multiple different data sets. And we want something that allows us to focus our limited time on actually managing risk and not managing the platform that manages risk. And so again, this is where not having John here really hurts. Because now I'm the vendor, he's the customer, he's the guy who gets to talk to you about this. But while I truly believe in the power of using a tool like Simple Risk, I'm also not a big fan of promoting it during a talk. Now, I will say it's free, but it's much nicer to hear it from the user of it than the guy who wrote it, right? I'm the bias here. We love you, Josh. Thank you, James. He was supposed to be heckling me. I don't know what happened. We're going to walk through the risk management process. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to take you through the process of mitigating risk. We're going to get rid of the Atlas syndrome and figure out how do we involve management in the process. And that's really the piece I want you guys to take away here. Yes, you could certainly download Simple Risk. You can use it. It's free. It's open source. But any other tool, any other platform should be able to do the exact same thing. So let's talk governance. We talked earlier about the strong governance function, our controls. And so we want to be able to either add our own kind of custom controls and frameworks into the system, or maybe leverage something else. And if you've never heard of it, there's actually this framework. It's a free framework. You can download it from securecontrolsframework.com. It's called the Secure Controls Framework. And it's a common control framework. It's got over 1,000 security and privacy related controls that have been mapped across 190 different frameworks. And that includes things like NIST, ISO, PCI, GDPR, HIPAA, like big long list, 190 different frameworks. So if you're an organization that either needs to leverage multiple frameworks, so maybe you're like, we're ISO, but we're also NIST CSF shop. And by the way, CMMC is part of our organization too. Compliance Forge is cool because you can set a single set of controls, you can define which controls you're going to use, and then those will map across all the other different frameworks. And I'll show you a cool picture of that in a sec. But it also really helps if you're moving from one framework to another. So like ISO 27001, the 2013 version was like the thing for the past decade. And then all of a sudden we've got the 2022. And you want to figure out which controls are new, which things have changed, and it helps us to do that. Number of controls. How many controls should an organization have? Let's take a quick poll. Should an organization have 20 controls? At least 20 controls. Yeah, all right, I'm with you. What about 50 controls? Should we have at least 50 controls? Nobody. One, a couple, all right, cool. 100 controls? 300 controls? Should we have all 1,000 SCF controls? I don't know. What I can tell you is that a lot of these frameworks that you get, like a PCI framework, you got like 300 controls, right? And so my advice to you around the control piece is don't look at it as an entire framework. Look at it in terms of which are the things that we value for our security program. Which of these controls are the things that's going to add value to our organization, to our teams? And start there. And you can reevaluate at a later point. Maybe you're like, full disk encryption, we don't really need that right now. But let's talk about it down the road. That's a big project. We'll deal with it then. So for me, each control should allow me to map my current and my desired maturity levels. It's that exercise that I talked about before that Alex and I did to do road mapping, to show our management, this is what we're going to do. And then if we have a nice little spider chart like this, we can use this as the roadmap for our security program. We can say, hey, we're doing really well at asset management. I don't think we need any more investments in that. But guess what? Secure engineering and architecture, maybe we should hire somebody who actually knows what he's doing, because I don't. Right? Let's hire somebody to help us out there, because the numbers don't lie. Now, risk management process, for me, when I first started my information security program, I came across NIST 800-30. If you're looking for some like bedtime reading material, it's great. It's like 100 pages long and it'll put you to sleep. But the basics of it are pretty simple. We have a risk registry. We want to make sure that every risk that we're finding is getting into a system where we can track it. That's the first piece, assessing the risks. Then from there, once we have it in a risk registry, we need to say, what are we going to do? We're going to plan our mitigation. Now, in terms of what we're going to do, the answer might be, hey, we're just going to watch this. Maybe we're going to transfer the risk. We're going to buy some insurance for that thing. Maybe we're going to actually fix it. The next piece here is to accept that mitigation, to say, yes, mitigation valid, we agree, management is on board, we're going to bless it with the money, the people to make this thing happen. Then management goes, they do the review, that's the blessing piece. And then risk management is a cyclical process. That's the reason these arrows go all the way around, by the way, cyclical. Risk management is a cyclical process. So we don't just review our risks once and then forget about them. We need to make sure that we are re-reviewing our risks on a regular basis. Now, why do we do that? Because risk changes, because environments change. That risk that we found a year ago might not be valid anymore. That risk that we found a day ago might be really, really worse in 3 months because back then it was an O-day and it was just like a proof of concept, whatever, and all of a sudden there's a worm that's running around on the internet. Our risks are going to change. I was having a conversation with John about this when we were preparing for our presentation for B-Sides Vancouver. And he said, he's like, tracking risks is kind of like Jira for security. I was like, you're right, man. Like the very simple risk management workflow gives us a simple intuitive interface. We like create our ticket, right? And then we say, this is how I'm going to fix that thing. And then we drive that to closure. Like risk management is Jira for security. Duh. So this is where we plan our mitigations. We make sure that, hey, we understand this risk, this thing that was submitted, and we're going to say this is how we're going to fix it. Now, interesting. This risk right here, this is a 10. This is like the worst thing. And Arsenic talked yesterday a little bit about this idea of like, what does a 10 really mean? I think that you can answer that question, but I think the way that you answer that question is with contextualization. When we look at our organization, oftentimes as security practitioners, we throw a 10 out there and we see if it sticks to the wall because it's something that we feel is bad. But if that 10 is on a non-production system, something that very few people touch, maybe it's protected by some other compensating control, something like that, is it really a 10? Just because the CVE score says it's a 10 doesn't mean it's a 10, right? And when we look at it in terms of the bigger picture here, so if we look at it in terms of our enterprise, the real risk that everybody is worrying about is CVE 2018-0123. Is that really the biggest issue that we face? Or do we have to worry about making payroll next month because we don't have enough customers? Right? Our business faces much bigger risks than we're privy to. So we need to contextualize this. We need to look at that and say, yeah, that's not really a 10. That's on one system. It affects one user who logs into that system occasionally. That's a 2. Either way, we need to make sure that we're documenting the decision-making process. How did we come to this decision? Making sure that we're performing reviews. So we can't really expect management to sign off on this thing if they're not involved. If everything that we do is we assess the risk and we say here's the problem, maybe we send them send them the email that says here's the vulnerability report, right? We want to make sure that management is involved in the process, that they understand the issue that you assessed, that they're aware of the risks that are involved, and now you let them make the informed decisions about that particular risk. Now, I like to think of risk management kind of like a pyramid. I put this report into Simforce many years ago, and it's like stupid simple, right? It's like, just tell me how many risks at each level. But every time I looked at this report, I was like, I've got this tiny little capstone at the top, and then I've got a few more and a few more and a few more. And it made this pyramid. I was like, it's brilliant. So most organizations, it's going to look exactly like this. You have the heavy bottom with less risk at the top. And I was like, how do I span this out? How do I make everybody in my organization, all the management people involved in this process? And I was like, boom, management is a freaking pyramid. So let's use that to our advantage. And when we start building out our responsibilities and things like that, let's assign the different review levels for the different risks to the different levels of management. And I was like, cool. My managers, you can review the low and insignificant level risks. By the way, those are the people that have the money and the people resources to fix those things. Then I'd say the section managers, you guys review the medium level risks. My directors review the high, and the VP reviews the very high level risks. So now we've taken advantage of this, like, I don't know, scale. We have this cool pyramid with our management. We like slap our risk management thing right on top of it. And we go, all right, VP, you see these like 5 risks that are sitting at the top? Tell us what we should do about those things. Those are your purview. Those are things that you're responsible for. Now we can also decide which users can create risks or who can modify risks, things like that. Now my advice here and what I did when I was at National Instruments is I thought, why should I restrict anybody from creating a risk? I mean, after all, my job is to assess risk. So if I'm putting like these artificial inhibitors between me and actually figuring out what the risks are, like that's kind of dumb, right? So I said, everybody in my organization has the ability to log into the platform and create risks. Because I want that Unix admin who finds like the unencrypted SSH key at like 2 o'clock in the morning, I want him to be able to create that risk and go right back on to what he was doing, but now I have that placeholder. I have something that we can go back to later on and say, all right, cool, tell me more. Mitigations. So try doing mitigations in Excel, by the way. How are you going to fix these risks? So for every one of the risks that we found, we need to basically say, like, this risk maps to this control, or maybe we need to add this control in place. Whatever it is, we need to be able to say, this is how we fix the risk. So in terms of making informed decisions about the risks that are out there, our goal, after all, is to enable the business to make informed risk-based decisions, like I said earlier. So one of the ways that we can do this is we can evaluate the biggest risk for our organization. And so we want to look at kind of the ordering of our risks, and we look at the highest level risk, the critical risks in our organization. Now, to Arsenake's point yesterday, the stuff that bubbles up, like, is it a 10? I don't know. But the stuff that bubbles up to the top should be the highest priority. And after all, this is really a prioritization process. It doesn't really matter what that score is. What matters is the fact that it's the highest one up there. Right? Those are the ones we need to figure out. But that's not the only way we can look at our risks. So we can also look at appetite. Every organization has a different level of risk appetite. And so if I can say my risk appetite is I don't want to have risks that are like higher than a 7, then I can report on that and say, all right, here's all the risks that are higher than a 7. What should we do about these? How do we lower the risk? Maybe not mitigate, but how do we reduce the risk for this particular thing? Lower the likelihood, lower the impact of this particular issue. And then we can make decisions based on the level of effort as well. So still looking at the prioritization, what's the highest issues in my environment, but now I look at, that's a trivial thing to fix. You told me it's going to take you like 5 minutes to do that, and it's a 10 risk score. Why wouldn't we do that? Like, I'll give you an extra 5 minutes on your lunch break. Go make it happen. And we can tie our risks back to our organizational controls and say, here's a control. Here's all the risks that are associated with that control. So if you want to tell me like, hey, that's not a key control, I can tell you why it is. Because these are all the risks that we're making, that we're mitigating as a result of that control. The cool thing is you can also flip this chart over and you can say, show me each risk and all the controls that are associated with it. And this is a great way to identify a lack of defense in depth. So if I look at a risk and I see a single control there, it's like web application firewall, that's all I'm doing. Man, maybe I should start doing some encryption or something else to kind of bolster that control set. Because if one thing fails, that thing right there. So now our management has the context that it needs to make decisions. They've got reporting, they understand what our appetite is, they understand what the highest level risks in our environment, they understand the controls that we've implemented, where they're failing. They understand it all. And now management can make these informed decisions about how do we treat the risk. And we have a platform that we can use to actually communicate it across the business. That's it. That was easy. Yeah, so the question is, hey, you're trying to tell management to like sign here, and how do we overcome that? How do we turn that like, no, I don't want to do it into a yes, like, okay. And it actually starts with management support. When I was doing this at National Instruments, one of the things that I did first and foremost is I went to each of the managers, not the teams, I started at the management level, and I said, hey, this is what risk management is. And I talked to them about the process. We create risks, we plan mitigations, we perform reviews. And then what I told management was, look, right now these risks, they're skeletons in your closet. They're bad things waiting to happen. And our goal with this risk management process is to get those skeletons out of the closet. We want to bring them forward, we want to put them into a place where now you have visibility. And that's the thing that management lacks today if you don't have a risk management process, is the visibility. You can't make informed risk-based decisions on problems in your environment if you don't have visibility into the issues that you're supposed to be making the decisions on. So if we can get those issues out of that closet, put them into a registry, and start to actually plan mitigations, we're better off for it. And that's how we convince our management. Now, the flip side to that is the people. Because you got to convince the individual contributors, the employees, to do this thing too. And the way you do that is you tell them, hey, right now, all these issues that you're finding, that's the Atlas syndrome. That's the weight on your shoulders. And everybody goes, yeah, I found that issue, but I figured if I told somebody, they wouldn't do anything about it anyways. So I just kind of kept it to myself. And ultimately, that means that if that issue comes to fruition, it's their butt that's on the line. That's like the thing that's going to get them fired. And so if we can tell them, hey, well, I'll tell you guys a story. So I was hanging out with one of our Unix admins. And he said, Josh, I feel kind of like I'm at the doctor with my pants around my ankles, right? I'm showing you the goods. I'm telling you everything that's wrong here. What are you going to do for me, Josh? And I said, look, these issues right now, they're your burden to bear. My promise to you is that if we can take these issues, if you help me to collect these risks, to put them into our registry, my promise to you is that management will see them. Not only that, but management is going to make a decision about what to do with this. Maybe that decision is we're not going to do anything at all, but I will make sure that management sees this and makes a decision about what to do. And so for the individual contributors, that's how we convince them that this process is worthwhile. To answer your question, sir? Awesome. Anybody else? Awesome. Well, I hope you guys will stick around for the next speaker here. In a couple hours, we got the badge game presentation. So if you're wondering how that works, please stick around for that. But thank you guys so much.